Okay. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm a principal at Hassel in our Sydney studio, and I'm chair of MECLA's Aluminium Working Group. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I am today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples here on the call today. As you can see, we are currently planning 3 deep dive sessions with key components of the construction and aluminium ecosystem, as we call it, over the next several weeks. Our upcoming sessions will be with consultants and architects, so facade and ESD consultants. And our last session of the year will be with the owners and developers, the people who often, set the brief and targets for lots of the projects that we work on. The purpose today is really twofold. Firstly, we'd like to share our working groups knowledge gained from the past year and a half of engagement, research and discussion. And secondly, we really want to hear from you what your experience, concerns, thoughts, or otherwise may be. And this includes our own working group members also on the call today. The discussion around embodied carbon in concrete and steel is much more advanced and well known as a topic, but aluminium obviously much less so. I know as an industry, we often seek competitive advantage, but the challenge here is really significant and the impact's even greater if we don't address it. So I'd really like to ask you all to join today's session and discussion with an open sense of generosity, which is something I've openly pinched from Karen Coker at Arup. I'm sure there will be many different views and opinions expressed here today, or at least I hope so, and that's really okay. Today is about hearing and learning from each other on a topic that I'm sure we can all agree is really an important challenge to address. So as I'm sure you're all aware, today's session is focusing on the roles of the main contractors and facade subcontractors, particularly in the construction and aluminium ecosystem. The working group and others have reached out to you in the effort of getting a good cross-section across the industry, both of main contractors and facade subcontractors, as you can see from the slide on the screen. I'm really pleased that so many of you have accepted to attend today's session, and I really hope that you all get something out of it. MECLA was founded in April of 2021 to address the issue of embodied carbon in the built environment. MECLA is all about collaboration across the entirety of the supply chain, and is necessary to find solutions quickly. Currently, we have over 120 members and counting, which I'm sure is probably updated now. Our purpose is to accelerate the decarbonization of the construction sector. By pooling knowledge and expertise from across the supply chain, we can really speed up decarbonization in these hard to abate industries and sectors. Importantly, MECLA does not tolerate any anti-competitive behavior. So if you're aware of any conflict of interest, please speak up so that we may adjust our actions accordingly. The format for today will be fairly simple. I have some material to run through that gives an overview of the topic and highlights some of the key points from our MECLA publication on low carbon aluminium. And this is really, I guess, sort of a scene setting for the opportunities and challenges in the Australian context. I'll move on to a very brief overview of a case study that Kiera Kenny from Lendlease has previously presented in one of our deep dive workshops. Unfortunately for our group, Kiera has just relocated to London with Lendlease, but we're fortunate enough to have some of our colleagues on the call here today who worked with her on this project. The last 3 items on the list are really a series of prompts for a guided or facilitated discussions on the topics of procurement, technical issues, and then a general open floor and wrap up. I know these sorts of events can be, quite challenging to unmute yourself, but I'd really appreciate and encourage if we had some good, robust conversations at the end of all of this. So to begin, my own aluminium journey, I guess, started just over 12 years ago. I was working for Foster & Partners on Masdar, a visionary, sustainable master plan city for 40,000 people in Abu Dhabi. It sounds a bit ironic and crazy, I know, and it was. There were many amazing and interesting things that came out of Masdar, but one that really stuck with me was the fact the project was the first to use recycled aluminium for its structural facade solutions. Prior to this, recycled aluminium had really only ever been used in a sheet or panel cladding. As a large owner and developer, Masdar used its own ambition and influence to attract like-minded companies to really push their own bounds. In this instance, Alcan, now I believe owned by Rio Tinto, teamed up with a small remelt partner to develop the particular strength alloy required for the facade extrusions. So that was 12 years ago, and recently in my work with Stockland on 110 Walker Street, I found myself asking colleagues, engineers, and contractors in the industry about the possibility of using recycled or indeed low carbon aluminium on the building's facades. And really, to my surprise, I received a lot of very confused looks, you know, on something that I thought would have surely advanced substantially in the time that had elapsed, but apparently had not. That ultimately led me to MECLA, where over the past year and a half, we have assembled a broad range of companies that form part of our aluminium working group and ecosystem, including architects, engineers, LCA consultants, miners, recyclers, remelters, researchers, financiers, and many others. Really, we're all aiming to get a better understanding of the challenges and opportunities for a low carbon future in Australia. The group has had contributions from really a broad number of people and companies over that time, but I'd like to highlight a few in particular that have really been integral to this journey, including Arup, Lendlease, Rio Tinto, Keppel Aluminium, Sims Metal, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, or CEFC, Western Aluminium, and Reclaim PV. Now, there are many others to share that have also contributed and continue to share an interest in this topic, and I'd also like to acknowledge their value to the group's journey so far. So, what have we been doing? I guess since our inception, we've held 2 spotlight events with key experts on the topic, which are still available for viewing from the MECLA website. And secondly, we've published MECLA resource on aluminium for the development and construction industry, which is also available for download now. This is a short 10-pager focused on the Australian context, and I think really acts as a primer for everyone in the development and construction industry to begin the conversations around our ambitions for a low carbon future. I'll now give a brief overview of that document, which I think will really help set the scene for the rest of the session. But before I do, are there any questions from the group?
We've got one. How come there hasn't been any contributors from facade contractors, so the tier 1 contractors, as part of this conversation?
That's a good question. We did reach out to a facade contractor in Australia who didn't initially join the group and for their own reasons decided to kind of pause their involvement in the group until later date. That's a good question. It certainly was an ambition of ours, and we're not against the any of their participation or joining the group. In fact, it would be much welcomed. That's a very good question, though. And again, part of the reason why we're holding a session like this today.
To me, that's the fundamental. That's the blockage. That's what we found in our my last 3 years of experience in trying to get green aluminium across to Australia. Is the supply chain.
Fantastic. So I guess hold that thought. There's certainly going to be plenty of opportunity to talk about that. But yeah, I can certainly agree with you, and really welcome much more of your sort of experience. Anything else before I move on? And thanks for that very much. Okay, I might crack on then. So globally, Australia is a really large player in the aluminium market. I'm sure most, if not all of you will know that virgin aluminium is made by extracting bauxite from the earth, then refining this into alumina, kind of a white powdery substance, which is finally smelted into aluminium. As you can see on the slide here, Australia is the world's largest bauxite producer and alumina exporter. Yet we're only the 6th largest producer of aluminium globally. I think we'll probably come back to this a bit later, but it's fair to say now that there is a real opportunity locally for Australia in its low carbon aluminium future. And I guess, so why are we even talking about embodied carbon of aluminium? Typically, aluminium is the 3rd largest contributor to a building's carbon footprint after, of course, concrete and steel. And compared to other primary materials used in construction, it is by far the most carbon intensive. As you can see on the graph here, for each ton of aluminium produced, approximately 14 to 20 tons of CO2 is emitted into our atmosphere, which is, by volume, up to 100 times more intense than concrete. So why is this? I think this picture probably gives it away. There are a few challenges around producing low carbon aluminium. The first being that it takes an enormous amount of energy to make it. Just to give you an example, in Australia, there are 4 aluminium smelters along our east coast. These 4 smelters, smelting facilities consume nearly 10% of the national electricity grid capacity alone. And that statistic really blew me away and really just puts into perspective for me the amazing amount of energy needed to make this material that we kind of all know and love. And also in Australia, the majority of this energy, of course, comes from our current coal-fired power supply. Yes, our grid is decarbonizing, and I think just how fast really remains to be seen. But we're really pleased to see recently, in just the past several months, 2 of our largest smelters at Tomago in New South Wales and Boyne in Queensland have outlined plans for large-scale renewables to power their massive industrial precincts. The other challenge is probably a bit more complicated. As many of you may know, the majority of our large-scale buildings and even medium-scale projects have their facades procured from overseas in Southeast Asia or China. Over the past decades, Australia has lost a significant portion of our manufacturing capacity and capability as a result of our current view, really, that cost probably outweighs all other metrics. So I guess the question is, even if we made our own low carbon aluminium just up the road, say in the Hunter, how much of it would actually make its way into our built environment here? And finally, the last challenge, not to be all doom and gloom, the last challenge we really see as ourselves as a development and construction industry. Advances, as I mentioned before, and opportunities in low carbon concrete and steel, for example, are much more broadly known. But the conversation that we're having today on aluminium is really just the beginning, and I think we've got some way to catch up. And now for the good news. I think we all know that aluminium is infinitely recyclable. What a really amazing, unique property that it has. In our document, that we've also outlined opportunities for advancing a low carbon future, and there really is a huge opportunity here. Currently, as you can see on the graph above, the linear economy dominates the value aluminium chain here in Australia. We extract more bauxite from our ground than anyone in the world, and we export it. We produce more alumina than anyone in the world, and we export it. We do, however, import nearly as much aluminium as we produce. We do import nearly as much aluminium as we produce, ironically. And then at the end of its use, you guessed it, we export it again approximately 95% of it to overseas markets. So a real opportunity to kind of turn that straight line into a circle across the aluminium value chain. And one of the great opportunities on that is that recycled aluminium requires only 5% of the energy needed to make virgin aluminium. Certified recycled aluminium alloys really are the technical equivalent of their virgin counterparts, exhibiting the same strength properties and finishing characteristics. And despite the vicious rumors floating out there, yes, it can be anodized if the quality of the product is carefully controlled and certified. And I'm sure there'll be some views on that later on. The other fantastic opportunity is that an estimated 75% of all aluminium ever produced is still in use. A material that's just waiting for recovery, recycling, and reuse. Again, an important opportunity to acknowledge as we transition to a circular economy model. I'm sure that, in the construction sector, the recovery of material from our demolished buildings is more mature than it has been in recent times. But I think there is still some advancements that we could make, particularly for the way we design for disassembly or even consider ownership models of our buildings and assets. A great industry first example of this in the Australian market is the recent announcement from Capral Aluminium, our working group member, for the supply of approximately 550 tonnes of clean production scrap to Australia's largest smelter, Tomago Aluminium, up in the Hunter Valley. This is the first of what I'm sure is to be an area of strong growth and opportunity throughout the Australian market. Okay, so now I'd like to take you briefly through a case study recently presented at our second Spotlight on Aluminium event to demonstrate really some of the obstacles and importantly learnings from the first large-scale building in Australia to pursue and successfully procure low-carbon aluminium for its facades. Designed by Renzo Piano and known as the Waterman's Residences, the third tower at One Sydney Harbour will be the first building in Australia to use low-carbon aluminium in its facades. It's I think a 30-story building that will house just over 200 luxury apartments and is anticipated to be complete in 2024. I think I saw earlier that we've got Michael and Vince from Lendlease on the call, so please feel free to interrupt or add anything, as you no doubt will know this much better than myself. Many of you may also know that Lendlease's recent very bold commitment called Mission Zero aims to achieve absolute zero carbon by 2040. That has really and truly put the flag on the hill for all of us and was a major driver for investigating options for low carbon aluminium on this project and others. The work began with a market scan of the known options, which were able to provide verified EPDs for their products. The team at Lendlease started plugging that various data in from known suppliers to demonstrate the significant savings, which you can see here on the slide was anywhere between 34 to 50%, depending on the product, compared against the benchmark BAL building reference. And one of the key findings from this process really was the importance of early supply chain engagement and persistence. As you can see, the team at Lendlease began their journey by including the requirement for low carbon aluminium in the specification and early tender conversations, and suggested even some known suppliers to their facade subcontractors. And then knowing that their colleagues in the UK had successfully implemented low carbon aluminium in their overseas projects, they reached out to see what learnings or connections may be of benefit for this particular project. It turns out, unfortunately, it wasn't quite as simple as just using the same product or same procurement from their overseas projects. So the team then refined their questions to ask more broadly questions about sustainable technologies rather than specific products, which in the end led to one facade contractor able to find a low carbon supply existing in one of their already existing supply chains. Not only was that billet ASI.
I might just pause you there.
Yeah, sure.
So I should switch my camera on. Sorry, I look like death warmed up, being just back on a 32-hour flight. So we'd be working. So PESA is the facade contractor across the three towers. So we'd commenced this journey with them probably back in 2019 to look at ways to procure low carbon aluminium. We found roadblocks continually all the way through, and so I took it upon myself to approach it differently and contacted various supply chains directly myself. So actually people who actually make the ingot, because I thought the best way to do it is to actually start working through and actually who produces the aluminium ingot, because it all starts from there. So we looked at all various, contacted our overseas counterparts, looked at who produces the ingot in a low carbon way. Some of them were very cost prohibitive that we found, particularly the ones coming out of Northern Europe, Scandinavian countries, and then we're able to find an alternative supply produces low carbon aluminium in another part of the world, which shall not remain nameless at this point in time. So that way, the actual person who buys the aluminium goes and buys the ingot from the manufacturer of the ingot and then extrudes the aluminium from there. So we had to break down that supply chain. That was the key.
Absolutely.
And what we found was contractors such as Pease and others, and they're trade partners of ours and they're very good at what they do, they're reluctant to push the boundaries because they don't see any benefit for them. There's absolutely no benefit. It's only ourselves and our teams who want to push the boundaries and go the extra step to find alternative producers of aluminium, the actual raw material and how it gets produced. And I think that's the challenge we have in Australia, is we don't have those manufacturing capabilities yet. So that's an industry issue at the moment in Australia. We've got the material, but we can't produce it low carbon.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. I'm really glad you're able to attend today. You might just want to add on. I'm obviously taking this from Kiera's previous presentation, but just to say that this is obviously an incredibly reduced account of what she originally presented, but I think it speaks to the key messages I think that you're kind of alluding to there, and really ultimately led to your success. The first was really early engagement. We all need to acknowledge firstly that this is possible, but only if we begin our conversations early and often. It may not come off for the next project or the one after, but like you found just in time for Tower 3. The second is, I think, persistence. Just because you may not find the answer you're looking for around at the first corner, don't let that stop you. It's never easy doing something for the first time, and don't let that challenge, I guess, be the obstacle. And finally, one from Kiara's perspective, and perhaps a bit more specifically, was, to make the questions that you're asking of your supply chain really specific, clear, but also built for collaboration, which is something I'm hoping you'd be able to comment on or add to. Would you like to do that now? Or we can maybe handle it in the Q&A later if you like.
So I can do it later. Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, John.
No, that's all good. I really appreciate you interjecting there. That's great. Okay, so I guess before we get to the kind of facilitated Q&A portion, of the session today, I'd like to wrap up, by highlighting what I think is a noticeable shift in Australia's advancement to a low carbon future. Notwithstanding some of the points that you just made, but there has certainly been, a marked increase in media coverage, awareness, and announcements over the past year. From the announcement between Capital and Tomago that I alluded to earlier, to federal and state ministers visiting key smelting facilities, signaling the government's shift in importance on these climate issues, to research initiatives, from leading circular economy consultants and working group members Corio on Australia's vast, potential for low carbon and circular future in aluminium. But not all of this, I think, is new. I think to your point earlier, there is a very small, limited kind of opportunity in terms of production capacity. But Rio Tinto's Bell Bay smelter in Tasmania and New Zealand smelter on the South Island do run on hydroelectricity and have so for several years. And they offer a local option, but again, as I said, comparatively to the rest of the world, very little output in terms of tons per annum. And Tomago Aluminium, as we talked about before, is Australia's largest owned smelter, owned by a consortium including Rio Tinto, Alcan, Gove Aluminium, and Hydro Aluminium, the group that you were mentioning earlier from Scandinavia and Northern Europe. So they're up in the Hunter Valley, and they've committed earlier this year to running fully on renewables by 2029. They're currently out to market for proposals and will play a key role in the Hunter region's transformation or transition away from coal to other sustainable technologies. Apologies if there's a bit of background noise. And finally, Rio Tinto has also recently announced plans to develop over 4 gigawatts of diversified renewable energy supplies and technologies to supply its Boyne smelter up in the Gladstone region in Queensland. So safe to say that I think there's a lot happening in this space, thankfully. Okay, so that's probably enough for me. We've got just over an hour to go, so hopefully that's more than enough time to sort of open up the floor for discussion and conversation. As mentioned at the beginning, the intent today is really to have an open conversation with you all around some of the key topics, being procurement, around our supply chain, sourcing, cost, and modern slavery. some topics around the material itself, and finally some more open groups, questions to the group to wrap things up. So please, I'd really welcome all of your contributions today, even if you feel that your points of view may be going against the grain.
Yes, Vince Albanese from Lendlease Building. Obviously, I've been working with Michael on One Sydney Harbour. I just want to expand on what Michael has mentioned. I think you need to attack that in both ends. I think the client is very important. If it's one of their key drivers, it needs to be driven by the client, because you're actually producing a product for them at the end of the day. You know, we're in the middle of this with One Sydney Harbour. Obviously, it's involved Lendlease development, and they're very much high in terms of sustainability. I think we're to drive it from the client end, and what Michael mentioned also is the producer, or who procures the ingots. Yeah. So I think we need to attack it from both ends to get some good mileage out of this low carbon aluminium.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and thanks for that point. We might touch on that a little bit more later and get some thoughts from other people in the group. And certainly there is the third in the series. You guys are a bit of the guinea pigs. This is the first of our 3 sort of deep dive sessions. And yes, we are looking to the clients, or the the developers and the owners.
Yes.
As a focus session, because we do acknowledge and understand that they really set the briefs. If there's no interest from them, then we probably have little chance of making it happen. Okay, so I suppose leading to the first question, I wanted to highlight a few other key points to really help frame the question, I suppose. This graph looks at the average carbon intensities of aluminium expressed in tons of carbon dioxide per ton of aluminium. As you can see, China currently has some of the most carbon intensive aluminium, on average between, say, 17 to 20 tons, depending on your sources. Not too far behind is Australia's average, ranging, say, between 14 to 15.5 tons, and again, compared to a global average of around 12. The 4 bars on the right of the graph represent aluminium produced using renewable energies and varying percentages of recycled content, and some of them are specific products as compared to geographical regions. So yes, as you probably do know, low carbon aluminium does already exist. These are just some of the well-known producers and products available on the market today. I suppose, as we've already alluded to, is how do we get our hands on it in the Australian construction context? And I think the answers probably lie in the key findings, from the case study that I just went through. So this graph illustrates the world's share of aluminium production, with China percentage share being 57%, which really far outweighs any other country or region. And I think the question to you all is, do you know where your aluminium comes from? How far back in your supplier's supply chain do you have visibility? And perhaps if you don't have that visibility at the moment, what could you do to increase that visibility? So just pause there to see if there's anyone that'd like to have a go at responding to some of those questions.
Jeff, look, I think you're right. The way the procurement model is at the moment, you place an order with a D&C contractor, and then you leave it up to them to engage a production facility that procures the aluminium, and there's no transparency, right? Look, at the end of the day, you're interested in the final product, its finish, etc., but you don't go a deep dive and find out what it actually comes from. Obviously, you're interested that they do get the ingots delivered so they can start extruding, etc., but generally we don't go that far. But now, if you start talking about low carbon aluminium, it's essential that you know where the things are coming from, as in terms of transparency and validation that you are getting low carbon aluminium. Because once it's produced from an ingot, then you got to really manage that you are getting the product that you're paying for.
Yeah, tracing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So verifying that it is has a certified EPD, then that is the product at the end of the day that's turning up to your facade extrusion facility to actually be used. Yeah,
that's right. Because it looks like any other bit of aluminium if you go to their facilities, right?
Exactly.
And I guess there's a lot of honesty in that process from suppliers.
Yep. Is it safe to assume that the lack of responses may suggest that a lot of us at the moment, and that's absolutely fine, don't know where our aluminium comes from? Is it a question that we haven't really asked? Is it, are we that sort of early in the journey? I'd really be keen to hear if that is the case or not.
No, I think you're right. I in the past, we're really not interested in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, I concur with Vince. It's not a factor in what we decide which subcontractor's doing it, where he's getting it from. There's QA processes in place regarding the product itself, not the raw base material.
Yep. So it'll be, for instance, like a particular billet grade, 60 or whatever, that to do a specific, to have certain characteristics or properties or strength that you want to make sure. But other than that, obviously the issues around its carbon content really haven't ever been asked before. So therefore, it's not a question you've ever really needed to ask in the past.
No, and typically I'd suggest that for the builders or the facade subcontractors on board today is that we would go to the extruder per se, but where they get their ingots from, we have no idea. I've never gone that deep down into where they get their raw product from.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll have their own internal procurement process. They might go to 3 or 4 suppliers to get the cheapest rate. Like everyone does that, right? So it goes all the way down the line. Yeah, and look, if you go back to the specifications that are being prepared, years ago, with the exception of the project you worked on, you won't find anything about that. It's all about the grade of the aluminium, make sure it complies with the specification, and it doesn't cover low carbon aluminium at all.
Yep.
Emma here from Built. We're working on the Atlassian project, and obviously we've had some very heavy carbon reduction initiatives incorporated into the project. When we were looking at the facades, we did investigate about carbon reduced aluminium, but all we were met with was extreme cost issues to do with procuring aluminium from Europe and the like, to try and get a carbon reduction on the aluminium. And then you've got certain directives on the project, like a 50% reduction, say, as a goal. But that doesn't all have to be achieved through the aluminium, but things get dropped off early on because they can't meet a 50% reduction goal. Whereas, and all in time to sort of price the project and get it on board, things drop away as you go on. But just the cost issues alone were really the stopping of doing any of that. And in fact, the design team sort of went into looking at hybrid facade solutions with steel to reduce the amount of aluminium in it because of the material EPDs on aluminium that we were using.
Right. So that's a really good point. And thanks, Emma, for contributing that. Cost is certainly an issue I've got a couple of slides coming up on earlier, and if it's all right at that time, I'd like you maybe just to expand a little bit more on that. What your findings were, what kind of questions you asked, what range of percentages you found. So if it's all right, we'll come back to that. Anyone else on that question? I think you've probably I guess validated what the group had thought previously, but I think it's really helpful to hear and understand that from your own perspective.
Yeah, look, just to add on that, I think there's no incentive for them to go out of their way to provide low carbon aluminium. I guess they're competing based on cost. So we need to change that paradigm, I guess, to give them some initiative, or if they play the game, I guess, and get what we're after.
But if all tenderers are required, to try and meet a, whatever target in terms of embodied carbon for aluminium, isn't that the incentive? Don't they have kind of equal incentive to?
Oh, yeah,
sell?
yes.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely correct. But I think it's got to be driven from the top down. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree, and that is
Because
definitely one of the
so
things
you
we're going
go
to bring
back
up.
to the client, you say, listen, this was going to cost you whatever, $200,000 more.
Hmm.
Now, depending who you're dealing with, they might say, yes, great idea. They might say,
Yeah.
no, it's over budget. The usual thing that normally happens.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yep. And
I think sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Just for us, I think quantum and complexity was also an added factor. And it sort of came down to the fact that we would have to supply the facade out of China, and then supply chain information being able to be provided for the project was just not able to be confirmed, and then the likes of EPDs and things like that all dropped away. So all of those challenges combined with big complex projects, which usually have these targets around carbon and that sort of thing to make an impact, often call for a lot more information. Smaller projects might be able to sort of get things up and running, but it's very hard to do on these larger projects.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raised, and it's something that the group has really acknowledged. The working group has acknowledged and discussed quite a bit over the past year and a half, that there is quite a difference between scales or ends of the market. I think the opportunities and challenges are actually quite a bit different for medium to smaller scale projects. And even like looking at all sorts of use of aluminium in the built environment, down to fencing or brackets or all those other kind of secondary components. The opportunities there are, I'd say, possibly easier to achieve, whereas the complexities, the facade package alone is a very complex package to procure with lots of different people inputting into it. And as we've said previously, we've only we kind of go back maybe 1-2 steps at most into that supply chain to have any visibility of what's going on. We've kind of touched on this, but maybe just as a follow-up question and kind of related, I think, what do you see as the challenges in procuring low carbon aluminium? Is it the lack of supply? Is it kind of existing contracts and relationships that have to play? Obviously cost, or anything else that you think is really sort of needed to unblock this opportunity?
Right, so Dominic Shillington from Mirvac. I was just going to, we also agree that the cost challenge has been our recent experience. But I think what we're interested in is, I think the well marketed products are probably the costly ones, but actually more data on our current supply chains, because potentially some of the aluminium is coming from lower carbon sources and hydropower, I guess, for example, but we just don't have any visibility of that. So I don't know if we can be, I guess, getting that data and just being a bit smarter about where the aluminium comes from. I know there's a lot of trust in that, and honesty, as someone mentioned before, but that's what we're looking at as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think because, just speaking with Caprol, one of our working group members here, they had already been, before they joined MECLA, been looking at sources for low carbon aluminium and getting some of it into the country. But it probably at the time, just not really publicizing it as much as they certainly will be now. So yeah, having visibility of what may already be there is an important factor, particularly on some of those smaller projects, or not the flashy ones that attract all the sort of attention, which may also be the reason that they're easier to kind of get over the line in the in the very first I guess sort of instance. Okay, anyone else? I've got some more stuff to move on to. It's all kind of like spurring thoughts and ideas, but if it's all right, well, I might move on to the next one. Obviously, kind of one of the elephants in the room is China. I think we're all aware that the role that they play not only in aluminium production, but really in the manufacture of facades that come into Australia. Thinking back to the graph that I showed earlier on carbon intensity of aluminium by country or region, China was at the top of that list for a reason. And that reason is currently, over 80% of the aluminium produced in China uses coal-fired power, many of which are captive coal plants, just for the smelting plant or smelting plants in that region. However, the Chinese government has certainly understood the impact of their coal-powered stations that they have on the climate and environment, and over the past 10 years has sought to move a significant portion of their smelting capacity to the more southern regions where hydroelectricity is in greater abundance. So this has already happened, and at the point, and the point being really is that there are options in China, or in fact wherever you probably procure your aluminium from, that we can all look into. And to Emma's point, the visibility of knowing where in China a particular facade manufacturer sourcing aluminium from is certainly a challenge. I do recall having conversations with one on the 110 Walker Street project, and I think it was stunned silence for a few minutes before I got a nod of the head no, like I don't know, and he can't tell you anymore. So certainly not disagreeing that there's a challenge around that. But I think, kind of as we talked about before, it's making sure it might not even be project specific at the moment. It's actually just starting to have conversations with your supply chain generally about the options, because surely it's going to come up, if not, this year or it'll certainly come up very, very soon. I suppose one of the unfortunate things as a result of this, I don't know, maybe you would have seen it in the news recently, but China's obviously had some really extreme summers past few years, and that's actually led to the government ordering several of the smelting facilities in these regions to cut their production to manage dwindling water supplies. So nothing's ever easy, but there are options, and this is just sort of one of them, right? As an example, there are sources and sources of information out there. This particular one is from a consultancy firm called Wood & Mackenzie. They produced a series of asset reports on nearly all of the Chinese aluminium smelters, and they outline their ownership structure, power supply source, annual output capacity, amongst many other things. It's kind of highlighted on the slide again. This single report identifies a region of smelters operating on hydroelectricity that produce over 3.1 million tons of aluminium per annum. So if you compare that with Australia's total production of 1.6 million tons, 90% of which we currently export, you can really see that if you ask the right questions to the right people early enough, I think there is a chance of finding a solution, even if it's a challenge. I suppose the question then is, from your experience and perspective, is the procurement of low carbon aluminium from China any different to procurement from any other country? Or if so, I guess why? So maybe kind of going back to some of Emma's points or any other points that you'd like to raise around that, but just acknowledging that, we do understand that a lot of our products come from Southeast Asia or China, and certainly some of you started to have those conversations. So just want to dive a bit deeper into that.
What I don't understand, there are people going around selling their glass products to the industry, but I don't see the aluminium producers that create low carbon aluminium go out and marketing their products, and I dust my head in. So I don't know if anyone knows why they don't do that. Obviously there's a market out there. Everyone's hungry for it, but it's difficult to identify who they are, and they're not out there in marketing what they're doing. I'm not sure if anyone knows why that's the case.
I can only give one example, is that certain facade companies have locked in the limited supply that some of these companies can produce already. So there's no more capacity.
Okay. Yep.
That's my understanding. Hydro, what is my, that's where the information I was given once, that certain suppliers they're linked to and support have already locked in the X amount of tonnage that they can produce at any point in time.
Right.
So there's no point marketing something they can't offer as
Produce,
additional.
yeah. Okay, right.
Brendan, I might throw over to you from Capral Aluminium, but before I do, I just want to touch on that, Daniel, because that is certainly something I've come across as well. You know, some time ago, I was speaking to sales manager from Rio Tinto, who looks after all their New Zealand and Australian facilities, and particularly interested in the product coming out of Tiwa Point on the South Island. And the issue is that they've got long-standing contracts with a number of suppliers, in fact, in New Zealand, that accounts for, I think, up to 90% of the product that's made annually there. So just getting in there early to negotiate contracts and get your hands on it is a challenge. And to the point around, sorry, if you could just mute yourself if you're not talking. Thanks. And to the point on hydro, interestingly, I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but they hydro actually has bought their own facade company called Wicona. I believe they're a German facade manufacturer, and essentially what they've done is they've taken their highest end product, their Circal product, so the recycled aluminium product, and they basically farm the vast majority of it to their own facade company. And if you want the lowest carbon kind of aluminium facade, then you sort of, particularly in the European market, now they do operate throughout Asia as well, but it's probably a bit more easier. You go to Wicona and say, I'd like to have one of your facades, and it's a bit more of a straightforward process. So Brendan, I was gonna maybe get you to respond to some of the comments on marketing, because I know we've talked a little bit about that, and certainly from my experience or recent sort of awareness, Capral has been doing a lot more around that space, and I didn't know if you wanted to comment on any of that.
Yeah, happy to comment on that, Jeff. I guess answering a couple of the questions there. Yes, there are a number of suppliers of low embodied carbon aluminium in a billet format around the world that have an opportunity to supply the world. But I guess Jeff covered it very well there in the fact that there are contracts that exist between extruders and their billet suppliers. Capral sources the majority of their aluminium through Rio Tinto, and as they supply to us locally, their local smelters aren't yet in that space. In saying that, Capral has also stepped outside of that square and has looked to import billet ourselves that is low embodied carbon. So extrusion that we're now supplying to the market for our windows and door systems has 8 tonnes of CO2 emissions per tonne of extrusion, and we would have probably another 300 or 400 tonne that we could supply to the market today at 4 tonne if the order or the opportunity presented itself. I think part of the challenge for us as a supplier of aluminium is to keep in front of the curve, hence we've stepped outside of Australia for sourcing, but to continue to support Rio as our major local supplier as they go through the transition with electricity and with also being able to have the capacity or capability of processing recycled content, either from us or from industry at large, which is currently all going overseas. So I think there's a bit of a mix there, but in the short, we've taken some steps to be able to provide that solution to the market here in Australia. The second part of the challenge will then be to be able to find facade fabricators that still have fabrication facilities set up here in Australia to supply the curtain wall market, which is a secondary challenge, because most of those went offshore when the industry decided that they would chase price for their product, and that was a cheaper, easier way for the Australian facade guys to survive, was to fabricate offshore and import back in. So each of those supply routes and chains have their challenges, but where we sit in the industry as a supplier is to try and provide a solution now, and also look at the industry as a whole in the bigger picture, and that is be able to provide demand for the product so that helps people like Rio locally to continue with that investment to move across to low embodied carbon aluminium.
Thanks, Brendan. I think maybe just also on that marketing point, I think from my perspective, the reason you're not seeing maybe as much as it certainly, as steel and concrete is just going back to the point that, the conversations around it are really just starting to happen. I think, certainly in my experience as an architect and, working on high-rise or complex buildings over the past 15, 20 years, like concrete and steel, yes, certainly have much more robust and advanced, conversations around them. But this is really the only, in the last year to year and a half, is the first time I've really only had a conversation around aluminium. So I think that probably just reflects the kind of status of the understanding of the issue but also the opportunity that we have.
I think steel and concrete are individually procured items too, whereas facade is integrated with so many other elements where you want to have an economy on your glass selection, for example. You won't necessarily be able to marry that up with a supplier of aluminium or the aluminium base material that suits your carbon offset requirements. So because it's such a complex element of design, of risk, of quality, you're procuring a system, you're not procuring the standalone element, and therefore you're sort of locked into a supply chain that doesn't necessarily have the resources to go and get this material that you're asking them to. And whilst we push them as far as we can, we also, when we've got these big projects, have to get to a point where we're able to commit to a contract and the components of it.
That's a really great point, Emma, and one that I know that Kiera was always really contributing to, particularly when we were writing that sort of 10-pager document that's available for download now. Just really acknowledging that the facade package as a procurement package or a works package is a much more complex beast than the other packages, and those issues you just raised certainly do present more obstacles or challenges to overcome. Okay, I actually also just was thinking there, I wanted to just, I guess, acknowledge that we did invite G. James, so Michael and Gary from G. James to attend today, and they had intended to, but they just emailed me just before the meeting saying that something had come up and they were unfortunately not available. Obviously, being Australia's largest facade manufacturer, we have been speaking to them over the past year and a half, and they have been participating. We really wanted to get their points of view on this. I won't kind of relay what they've shared with us previously, but just to let you know that we have reached out to them and we have been in multiple conversations with them, but unfortunately they just couldn't attend today. I think part of this discussion, if it's all right to move on, is not just about embodied carbon, but also about more broader issues about our very complex and global supply chains. It's not just the things that go into our buildings, I think, but I'd argue that I think very few of us are actually aware of where our things come from and the impact that those things have on our environment and the people that are involved in that supply chains. So I think it's also really important that I'm clear here that this is, there's no intention here to single out China or to make a bad example of them. However, I think it is a reality that as we've been discussing, the vast majority of our large-scale building facades currently are manufactured in that region, and owners, but at the same time, owners and developers are increasingly committing to modern slavery targets and initiatives that are under growing scrutiny. Unfortunately, also, Sebastian Lowenstein from the CEFC was unable to join us today, but over the past year, as a federal sort of financier looking for green projects or projects that are really exemplifying something that need funding, he's not just looking at the kind of impact to the environment or the impact to embodied carbon in the built environment, but also as a financier, where's the money that they're giving going to? What is it supporting? What is it, so that's a question that he is really been focused on, and I think when we start to talk to the developers and owners later on who report on these issues, I think it's something that they'll start to show a bit more attention to. So I guess I probably know the answer to this just having heard the conversation already, but I think it's important to ask anyway. How are you addressing modern slavery in your facade procurement? Is it even an accessible items in the tenders that you're seeing? or how seriously do you think that this weighs in the tender process at the moment? And I'll open it up there.
Not at all. I'll say it. Not at all. Same as knowing where the ingots come from. We wouldn't have a clue. I personally wouldn't, and I'd be surprised if anyone else in here does. To be brutally honest, we don't know what, especially with the majority of facades coming out of Southeast Asia, as you've intimated, and also the commentary regarding China with the but caveat after your commentary, Jeff. We wouldn't have a clue what sort of working conditions or what agreements or lack thereof are in place with any of the people that we see walking around these factories. We wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah, the only way we do get some level of understanding is by personally inspecting the manufacturing facilities of our facade contractors, which it's been difficult over the last couple of years due to COVID.
Yeah.
But now recently, I won't put Vince on the spot, but recently Vince went to Thailand, went to Pisa's manufacturing plant there in Thailand to inspect for the R3 facade, because they've just kicked that manufacturing off. And so he was able to, witness the conditions and I guess the staff, the workers and their conditions as well as part of the technical review. Part of that process, we incorporate modern slavery inspections. But in terms of how far back can you go, as Daniel said, it's difficult because we don't go and see the actual manufacture of the ingot itself.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously it's specified in our specification in our subcontract agreement, but you can only the rest is just trust that they give you a signed document that they're not using modern slavery. And like Michael, the only way you really find out, you go out there and have a look, but you can only go so far. You're spending months out there checking all their suppliers because they're buying components all over China. Yeah.
If you look at to put a facade together, we've worked it out. There's over 50 different suppliers which come together to form that facade, for example.
Yeah.
This is just for one Sydney Harbour. Every job was different, but I think it was 52 off the top of my head. Because we went that deep into who's supplying the screws, who's supplying the brackets, who's supplying the blinds, who's supplying every single component.
Yep. That's
the hardware, the sliding doors, you name it.
Yep.
Even down to the silicon.
So is it something that is a line item or an accessible item in tenders that you're seeing or not?
No, it is, but like Vince said, it just comes down to trust.
Right.
I'll give you the documentation, but it's on trust. Like how do you validate that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where it stops.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dom, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, it's a declaration only, and
it is.
I know recently the challenge is just not being able to get to that the main country that we're talking about here recently. So that's not even being able to personally go to those inspections. Actually, just recently, some specific looking at alternative supply options, and actually the Middle East, because it's had so much attention on modern slavery, actually had better data on what the impact actually is, I guess, from the World Cup focus and others. So we've seen some better data out there, but it's still very hard to track.
But it's happening here. I mean, you look what's happening in Australia. You've got McDonald's and big organisations that you buy food from them, right? Because you think they're sustainable, but every once in a while it comes out on the news. You assume it's correct. They're not getting paid the way they should be, and Coles and Woolworths, and now we're going to China and expect them to be transparent to us. Very hard, very difficult. But anyway.
No, certainly take your point. I was just thinking, unfortunately, I didn't add any slides here around the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, which I'm sure some of you may know, and I know that doesn't solve the issues, particularly when you're dealing with over 50 different suppliers on a single works package. But the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative is a certification body, a global certification body that looks into those sorts of social and human rights issues on the supply chain. So I think Brendan, if correct me if I'm wrong, but Capril, you're in the process of seeking that certification. Obviously, lots of the major suppliers, if they don't have it for all of their plants or facilities, are kind of going around, mine by mine, facility by facility, or smelter by smelter to achieve those accreditations, to start to close the loop in some of those gaps. But yeah, sorry, Brendan, you want to expand on that at all?
Capril has now achieved membership with the Australian Stewardship Initiative, and as part of that, it then allows us, and we're sourcing from ASI certified smelters for our billets, and Capril ourselves will go through and are going through currently the audit process. So hopefully by Q1 next year, we will then have chain of custody and other certifications signed off, so that we will be an ASI certified player in the industry. And that's just to our level, but people that flow on to the next level of, or the next chain down in the link, have that opportunity as well to form part of ASI if they wanted to be involved. And you're right, Jeff, it does cover off modern slavery, and it covers off a whole range of other issues as part of the process in our sustainability activities and record keeping and processing, and a whole range of things which is independently audited.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Brendan. Anyone else before I move on to probably our favorite topic of cost? Okay, so
that's the most important one.
Okay. So how much more does low carbon aluminium cost? Now, I'm sure you all have a chuckle to have an architect speaking about this, and by all means, you feel free to unmute yourself and laugh away. So, the price premiums of concrete and steel are certainly much more widely known and accepted by developers and owners. Again, those conversations have been happening for a much longer period of time, and increasingly buildings are, implementing lower carbon concrete or steel on their projects. But I guess, just how much more exactly does the low carbon aluminium cost? And before I give you what I think it costs, I like to leave it there and throw it open to you all, as I'm sure, as we've started to hear, you've got insights or views on, roughly what that may be, or as a percentage or not. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts and perspectives on that, if I could.
I think just from our, single project perspective, big complex project, it doesn't come down to the cost of the aluminium alone. It comes down to the glass selection and everything that comes with the procurement of the facade package. So where maybe European suppliers could give us a lower carbon aluminium offering, we also then were sort of, required to then select from their glass selections or build-ups as well, and supply of the whole system out of Europe as opposed to China. So I think the cost from this, our project perspective, was sort of across multiple elements of the facade, and not just isolated, or not able to be isolated just to the aluminium material itself. And that's where things, came unstuck.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting point. Appreciate that, Emma. Daniel, I'm waiting for you. Or anyone else?
Trying to write an email and listen at the same time. Look, as a percent, do you want my guess? I would have thought that the Lendlease boys would probably know much more than I do, but I guess it's probably 20-25% more expensive.
Oh, look, I think the experience we had, it wasn't a big factor in procuring low carbon aluminium. That could be a one-off situation. So that actually,
I was just guessing. I have no idea.
Oh, no, look, there are
Look,
places.
it's actually, Daniel, it's actually minimal. You'd actually laugh. If I told you the number, you would laugh on a $30 million facade package.
That's right.
Really?
You wouldn't
Yes.
worry about it. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, honestly, mate,
it's peanuts.
it's peanuts. I'll be
Oh,
honest
excellent.
with you.
How are you, Michael, anyway?
Good. I think the other factor is you probably need to allow between 3 to 6 months in your procurement process to allow for the extrusion of the ingot. Again, depending on the relationship. Let's just say, for example, who JWA, one of the largest China's manufacturers of aluminium facades, which Pisa and others buy the extrusions from. It's understanding who they get the ingot from. So it's that whole link and that supply chain. That's what needs to be understood up front.
Yeah.
But in terms of cost,
so it's a more of a lead time issue than a
yeah. So again, up front during the tender process, depending on the type of project, if you're doing an integrated project like Lend-Lease tend to do, then all that can be factored in up front. If you're tendering for an external client in a horse race, race to the bottom, so to speak, you might put that up as an option, as a value add option. It just depends on how you want to play the game at the end of the day. But so,
or even if they're asking the question to you, but you're right.
Yeah, I mean, you might, yes, exactly. So, and I think it's partnering up with the right people up front, with the right the procurement model, and this is the challenge now, particularly with the way the market's going. It's changing. The Yuandas, the Pisas, etc. They're all changing at the moment, so they're going through their own transition phases. So, I guess that all needs to be factored in.
Well, you've certainly made me stop sweating just a bit there, because that actually aligns to the research that I've found. So, obviously I'm no means an expert on this topic, but just thought I'd share some of that research on what I found for the supply of just the raw material, sort of as you were talking about. Obviously, aluminium, like all other metals, is traded on the open market, usually per ton. The graph here shows a fluctuation in that market price per ton over the past year to date, ranging from roughly $2,250 up to $3,750 a ton. Obviously, this year's been quite a volatile one, just to see quite a range in the price there. So the quote that we've got there on the screen is from an article where they're looking at the price premiums that purchasers and suppliers were looking to agree or to contract into, and the statement there is about an average of about $30 per ton was the premium that you might be expected to pay, and there was evidence of people paying as little as 10 and as much as $50 per ton. And I guess when you look at that, say, well, a ton, based on an average cost of about $2,500 a ton, that $30 a ton represents about a 1 to 2% uplift on the base cost of the raw material. So happy to see that sort of aligns to your experience, at Lend-Lease and supplying. I'm not saying that that's, always going to be the case, but obviously cost is always an issue, and the question is always going to come up when we start, having those conversations. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, our experience, or mine personally, with again across the three towers at One Sydney Harbour, is when I started having these conversations with Pisa, they came back to me with some ridiculous numbers. Like, we're talking millions, right? It was like doubling the cost of the aluminium. So if the aluminium itself on a building was the actual materials, say, worth $3 million, they would come back to me and say, oh, it's an extra $3 million for the supply. And I go, you guys are going to be, joking, absolute joking, right? And they and that's the pushback like we got early on days. I think they just threw some stupid numbers at us that just, you go, well, how can it be, right? So therefore, without breaking down those barriers and going and doing some investigation yourself, that's where you start unlocking down the actual supply chain and working actually out what the cost is and who controls what.
Yeah, good point, Michael. Jeff, has I haven't watched all the presentation. Sorry, so I'm sort of working at the same time, but
That's all right.
the investigations to where these smelters are or where they're producing it in your, do you have that information?
I do.
My only cost uplift was going to be potentially on shipping from point A to point B for
So I do, but I don't have
material.
it. I do, but I don't have it because the Wood Mackenzie Group per report, I think it costs like $2,500 per report, and they're kind of updated almost yearly. I didn't feel like spending $2,500 of my own money to really read what was in there, but these reports essentially are made for investors looking to, to invest money in these sorts of places, or so like the point really being that the information is out there, either if you want to buy it or ask enough questions, of your supply chain. But really the point is for me is that, we can sort of educate ourselves to be able to help ask the right sort of questions to the right people to keep digging a bit deeper, because I think, like we were just talking about with Pisa, the first time you ask the question, you're probably going to get a ridiculous answer back that it's either not possible or it costs double or doesn't exist or whatever. And that we just kind of need the tools or information to be able to fight past that and keep asking the questions, I think.
So can I ask a question? How long from when that question was asked and it was millions of dollars to get it done to actually getting the result of getting the ingot from an alternative location and not having a cost associated with the procurement of?
So when we procured R1 Tower in 2019, they asked the question. They threw a stupid number at $3 million. We asked the same question again on R2, very similar height towers, only 4 floors difference. So very similar value and package. I think it's the order of $60 million. They threw me a stupid number, 1.2 off the top of my head. And then the third time I thought, well, I'm not going to take the same path. And it took us probably about, no more than 2 months when we started talking to Pisa about the third tower. So within a 2-month period, 2 to 3 months, we had it pretty much resolved. I was just going back through some of the emails because unfortunately they go into archive after 12 months in our system. I was looking at between about August last year till about this time. So between August last year to this time, and then we wrapped up the deal in just before Christmas with Pisa.
Yeah, and I think we were lucky. I think they had the ingots available.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were shipped straight to China, within a month.
Yep.
But what we were saying before, supply and demand that we spoke about earlier, and it is an open market, so things can move and shift over time, I guess.
So I'm just making a few notes.
That's sorry.
Go ahead, Dom. Yeah, go Dom.
Similar to what we've seen on, I guess, the larger scale projects where we speak to some of the more maybe sophisticated or tier 1 subcontractors. But yeah, definitely when it's not that case, that's where we're seeing the bigger numbers, but it's still a cost. Like I guess even 1 to 2% on a big package is still a lot of money that we're seeing. But I think interesting to hear in a competitive situation, maybe that's where it can be absorbed.
It wasn't. So just to let you know, R3 was negotiated with Pisa, so it wasn't. We didn't go to open market. We didn't have the time on that tower.
Okay, I'm just mindful of time. We just got about 10 minutes to go, and we just got really one more section. So I might just crack on, and it's really just to talk about a few more technical things. And I think they're fairly simple questions, but again, really keen to hear what your thoughts or perspectives are on these issues. And these are really some questions that have come up through our engagement more broadly through the working group. Is a low carbon aluminium the technical equivalent of a regular aluminium, or in other words, does it have the same technical properties and performance? So yeah, keen to hear the answers from you, because these are some of the questions that I've been getting asked, in that engagement, and just keen to know, if we all I guess if we all understand that essentially a low carbon aluminium does have the same technical properties and performance as quote unquote regular aluminium. It's literally just the power supply that enables its reduction in carbon intensity. Are those questions ever sort of come up in any of your experience, or have been disputed?
The
I guess
only one I've seen is if it's recycled, you can't use it to get the right alloy. Yeah, sorry. That's probably your next question.
that's all right. It was a fairly simple one, but I thought it was just worth asking. Just, part of this is really just about dispelling any myths that may be out there, and but yeah, no, you're right, Dom.
Yeah, so sorry, recycled aluminium, I think, can be the same, but you just can't use, 100% recycled aluminium to get the right alloy. That's my understanding, but I don't know if that's probably changed again with the latest update.
No, look, I think you're right. Look, at the end of the day, people have to comply with the specification where the grade is specified. If you get it from hydroelectric power to generate low carbon aluminium, there's no issue there at all, using the same virgin aluminium. But like you said, with recycled, obviously there's some science behind that on how much you can use and still get the right product that comes out of the in the ingots. And then it goes through a process of getting extruded, and it gets hardened and tempered, etc. So there are technical issues, but like everything else, if you're specifying a specific grade of aluminium, you trust that it's all compliant, wherever it comes from.
Yeah,
Jeff, if I could jump in and probably offer some guidance here.
sure.
On the world market, there's an international standard that we all comply with, or our suppliers who are casting the billets comply with, in relation to the alloys, so 6060 or 6083 or whatever particular alloy. And that's easily done when you're starting with prime or virgin product, because you add the aluminium, and to get the alloys, you're adding different metal contents, magnesium, silica, manganese, etc., copper, to get it so that it has its structural properties. When we introduce recycled aluminium, because we don't know what alloy or temper, or alloy particularly, that was in its original state, when we mix that into a batch of a pot of aluminium, we actually have to go back and work out what the chemicals and the elements are within that batch. That takes time and it costs money. So where you see Comigo, who's agreed to take aluminium back from Capral, it's because we can clearly define and share with them the alloy that they've supplied to us and the alloy that we're giving back to them. It hasn't gone out to the market and become unknown. The smelters in Australia are now starting to look at how they can take back scrap aluminium with it being unknown, and potentially rejig their working processes on their smelters so that they can recast that back into defined alloys that they can sell back into the Australian market. In the international market, there is aluminium that is recycled, that's cast into billets, that gets used for rolled product or extrusion products, that doesn't meet the international standards for a 6000 series alloy, etc. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And thank you for chiming in there. You said it well, much better than I could have done. I suppose the point really being that it is certainly, obviously, as you said, much more of a challenge if you don't know, if you've got kind of post-consumer scrap going into the mix, then you've got a much bigger challenge on your hands. But I think the world is moving much more to obviously certainly look at those opportunities in pre-consumer scrap or post-production scrap. But then also getting smarter about how alloys are marked and tagged. But I think the important thing, at least from what I've learned and understood, is that if you have a certified billet of a particular alloy that is a recycled aluminium, that it does have the same properties as a virgin aluminium billet would, because it is, I guess, technically or chemically the equivalent of its virgin counterpart. you know, again, just a question that kind of came up from more the developer owner side, saying, look, we're keen on it, but you know, is it the same? Is it inferior in any sort of capacity? And those are some of the sorts of things that we needed to address in the conversations that we were having.
Yeah, through Mr. Lisa, we managed to get the chemical composition of each ingot as part of their process. So that gave us a bit of comfort that we knew what we were getting at the end of the day, although they didn't use a lot of recycled aluminium, but still you can get that information if you ask for it, because it's part of their QA, I guess, what they're producing. Yeah, they give you a bit of comfort. Yeah,
yeah, readily available from every extruder for the
exactly
processing if you ask for it.
Yeah, it's correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Now, just for the wrap up, we've just got a few minutes left, and really, it was just to open it up to see if there are any other questions from the group, of anything that we may not have covered, or any other points that you wanted to raise.
Oh, look, something I wanted to bring up, and it's not discussed a lot, and I don't want to offend any aluminium producers, but I think the people that design buildings, architects, etc., they do introduce a lot of aluminium in our buildings, and I think that's an area that we need to focus on, because it all starts off of the design intent, what the skin of the building looks like. And if you look around, and it's getting more and more and more aluminium that we're used to, and it's probably driven by the authorities to create some articulation in your facade, and obviously you do that with aluminium. And here you go, and you're going to this cycle that great for producers, but I think we're sort of, I don't know, we're going in the wrong direction.
At this stage in the journey, yeah, it's not
in
helping
this
us,
stage
is
of
it?
the journey, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's a good point. Certainly something that we've considered here at Hassel when we're looking at other buildings, skins and facades, knowing that the likelihood at this moment in time to get low carbon aluminium is going to be a challenge.
Oh, look,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's a great product,
Yeah.
But we're struggling with carbon, etc. So people should think about that in stage one in their design.
I think it's a great point. I think facade engineers should also look at it, for all of the builders, that every structure now is built wafer thin, which means that the stack joints need to increase, that the mullions need to increase to take additional deflections. There's a person nodding their head, and you get a basis of design from facade engineer that you, as a builder's tender, and when it goes to the ringer, then the stack joint increases by 10%. Mullions have to widen from 80 mil that the architect wants to 95 or 100, and all adds up.
You're
no,
not
you're
talking
right.
from personal experience, are you, Daniel?
Yeah, every project.
No, it does. It all adds up.
And the builder will also look at how to reduce the slab thicknesses and reduce reo costs, and PT slabs, and these PT slabs are going to move more than others may.
Yeah,
it's a combination over and above the fenestrations and the architectural intent that is required or requested by the architectural firm.
Yeah,
it's a combination of both, I think.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Come on, Matthew, I knew you were going to respond to that.
Oh, I was just going to say that the structural engineer will say he's doing that to save on embodied carbon, but what he doesn't realise is he's just throwing it all into the facade. So we
just pushing around the building.
Yeah.
It's always the facade's problem.
Yeah.
Oh, but look, I think what we mentioned earlier, I think transparency where these products are manufactured would be very interesting to allow us, like we said earlier, it's all about doing enough research to be able to counterattack the pricing that you're giving or the availability and the lead time. The more knowledge we have, it's, will add in this synergy that we're trying to achieve. So if we can get that information out to the market, that'd be a great outcome. Because I think everyone's done their own little research, but I think if you all put our heads together, we'll get up with a better database that we can all feed into.
Well, I think that very point across all three parties is the early engagement with subcontractors and contractor to try and achieve some of these goals is the only way to really drive it through. The design team don't have the same connections that we have, you know, for procurement and development of these detailed solutions when there's big, hairy sort of targets attached to reducing carbon. You know, they're in some ways helpless to be able to convert that without the contractor available to. And that's what we found recently in many projects where we've got these sorts of things going on. It's nice to have sort of the developer and contractor in-house, but it's not always the way. So getting the contractor involved early and upfront can sort of uncover lots of opportunities, and we've had lots of them and lots of wins in the Atlassian project. Unfortunately, aluminium wasn't one of them, but maybe this, you know, but there are still opportunities yet to be uncovered there for us. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, we've just kind of hit 3 o'clock, and I'll probably wrap it up there and really just say thank you to everyone for joining today, for participating and sharing your experience and perspectives. Really, in particular, to Brendan and to Vince and Michael from Lend-Lease to share your kind of experience and knowledge, which is really invaluable to a group like this. I think what we're looking to do is to hold the next 2 deep dive sessions with the consultancy groups and then the owners and developers by the end of this year. There might be 1 or 2 more sessions in the new year, and then we'll look to kind of dissect all that information and put something out to market to kind of see, you know, what we've learned from this process. So thank you very much for all of your attendance and participation, and I'll leave you to it there.